Approaching Soul Relay, Commander.
Hey there folks, Wrel here. There have been a few games over the course of my life that I felt emotionally attached to. When finishing Half-Life 2, I was angry or frustrated. You spent time building this relationship with Alex Vance, and then the game just ends on a cliffhanger, and without even a sequel in sight. In the Mass Effect games, I had a different feeling, a sort of sullen lull as the credits roll, but I look back and I thought, despite the ending in 3, I ran through the game quickly in my head, retracing those steps, and I think to myself, wow, that was a really good game. I'm glad I did that. In Witcher 3, when the game ended, I just didn't want it to. I want to be able to visit Ciri and talk to her and hang out and go drinking and have her tag along on wacky adventures and play the somewhat overprotective father figure that Geralt was made out to be. I just wanted more. Powerful games inspire emotions like that. Sometimes it's frustration or anger, sometimes it's sadness or satisfaction, sometimes it could be a spike of genuine happiness that comes from watching a story unfold. I feel that powerful games also create attachment to a game's characters. The player can imagine themselves hanging out with those characters. I feel like I would be incredibly fortunate to have a friend like Garrus Vakarian, and in a lot of ways I think we are feeling like we are hanging out with these characters as we play through these powerful games because we project ourselves into the main protagonist. And this is all virtual. It's nothing that we can touch or hold or watch evolve or poke or prod and get a reaction out of. It's not outside of the computer monitor or TV screen. But when we're sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories, that can creep us out. It can put us on edge. Reading a good book can engross us in completely new worlds and even distort our sense of time. When James Cameron's Avatar came out in 2009, there were reports of people contemplating suicide because the movie was just that beautiful and emotionally binding that they couldn't go on living in this comparatively boring world anymore. And of course, that other world doesn't exist, which is the point. It's the emotion that makes things real for us, or at least more real. What's kind of interesting to me in the games that I mentioned earlier is that Half-Life 2, Mass Effect 2 and 3, and Witcher 3 were all played at different periods of my life. These are all RPGs, so there's some similarities, but I think that the way that they were structured, combined with my disposition at the time, kind of played into the types of emotional connections that they fostered. Half-Life 2 I played as a teenager with raging hormones and all, so I had that sort of puppy dog love for Alex Vance, and the frustration was created when the game just ended. It didn't give me anything more. The game was also very linear. Mission to mission, you're an actor in a story instead of being a character who makes decisions that will split the game's path. Mass Effect 2 and 3 I played when I was an adult, so I like to think that I wasn't as desperate for virtual affection as I was when I was a teenager, but the games were also structured differently. For one, you had a host of really strong characters like all across the board that you not only built up relationships with, but that crew developed as characters themselves. It finally gets to the point where you're satisfied with their evolution, and it kind of makes sense that the game comes to a close. Now, whether or not you enjoyed the finale is a different story for sure, but all along the way you're looking back and you're having a back and forth with these characters, learning more about them, building up a very real connection with what would otherwise be just a bunch of pixels on your screen. One of the key factors that created more a sense of satisfaction from that game, though, is that since I knew I had choices and parts that I missed out on, I could go through it again and experience the game in a different way. And to some degree it serves as an excuse to revisit old friends. Playing through Witcher 3, I was obviously older because the game came out only recently. I had a kid, so I was a father, and Geralt's story is one that I felt like I really connected with because he was chasing Ciri forever, trying to look after what is basically his daughter. He turned from this smooth-talking ladies' man in the first and second games to a much more respectable adult that was responsible for the life of this other human being. And when you do finally catch up with Ciri, there's this wave of relief, and then there's some frustration and fear even for her safety, and it took so long, and then you get to be genuinely happy with the way that things turn out, if you actually made the decisions that ended the game on a positive note. But these emotions couldn't really come into play unless you had that sense of responsibility for her in the first place. Like the Mass Effect trilogy, Witcher 3 has some really important replayability elements since you heavily influence a story based on your decisions, but even better is that they don't frame the end of the game as the end of the story, like Mass Effect does. They instead pull a Shia LaBeouf on you and say, look, you had all these great adventures, but you're not going to stop there. You've got 2 more expansions, you've got a bunch of side quests, other stuff that you haven't seen yet, so just do it, etc. And they move you into Heart of Stone DLC, Blood and Wine DLC, and oh my god! Oh my god, it's so good. Roller coaster of emotions. If there's one game that you should play in the history of games, it's Witcher 3. Don't even need to play through the first 2, it's just that good by itself. But I digress. Being able to invoke emotion from a player is an important part of creating a powerful game, a moving game, one that you want the player to see more of, and there are plenty of ways to accomplish that. Making a player feel responsible for the well-being of a character is a way to build a relationship between those characters, as shown by Ciri in Witcher 3. Having constant and meaningful interactions with characters also builds connection, and it makes future events more impactful. Example being Thane's death in Mass Effect 3. If you took the time to learn of his situation in Mass Effect 2 or be his love interest, you probably ended up feeling sad or angry. You can also force a player to make a decision that they do not want to have to make. For some players, an example of this could be in Mass Effect 1, where you have to choose between saving Caden Alenko or Ashley Williams. Immersion can also be a good way to trigger emotions. Horror genres, for example, kind of suck if they don't get the atmosphere right. The idea is to move a player from the mentality that, oh, it's just a game, to a reality that they can then lose themselves in. Then there's the age-old option of just telling a really good story. Emotion doesn't need to come from the player's character or from the decisions that they're making, but can also be just from the outcome of a relationship that they are observing and have no control over. Cutscenes are a way to do this. In particular, I think that Mirror's Edge Catalyst hits the nail on the head time and time again. Now, we talked a lot about fostering emotions in games, but definitely tailored the conversation more towards single-player games. In multiplayer, I feel it's a little bit different because the experience is less controllable, and instead of really emotionally investing your players in the game or its characters, you're focusing more on the highs and lows that are created with the players' interactions with one another. And I can certainly be wrong here, and would love for someone to share some good examples of emotionally powerful multiplayer games if you have access to that. But if you can't think of anything, maybe just let me know which games you wish would never end. The ones that you were really invested in, the ones that kind of tugged on your heartstrings once the credits started to roll. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and again, if you have any good answers to those questions, I'd love to hear them. So thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.